The 2024 NFL Draft is over, which means it's time to grade every team on how they did. Let's start with the AFC. This video may be controversial, so get ready for some bold takes. If you're new, subscribe to the channel as I am releasing draft content all year long. But for now, I'm Chase Keller, and welcome to 2024 NFL Draft Final Grades, AFC Edition. Enjoy. Beginning with the worst AFC grade, I have the Houston Texans, who also had the worst grade in the whole league. I thought they made some solid selections throughout the draft, but the beginning of the draft is what set them back early. Houston filled up possibly their biggest need going in at cornerback and selected Georgia's Kamari Lassiter. At that point, he was the 8th best corner on the board and was a reach in terms of value. This set the tone for the rest of the draft as they selected Notre Dame offensive tackle Blake Fisher 59th overall, and I had him as a mid-5th round talent, which justifies the bad grade. They also made one of 7 F-grade picks in this draft, this one being the last with linebacker Jamal Hill. But they did make some A-grade picks with tight end Cade Stover at 123 and defensive tackle Marcus Harris at 247. Kalen Bullock, Solomon Byrd, and Ladarius Henderson were also some solid picks to fill up some positional needs. I just think that Houston made too many mediocre selections, which leads them to being dead last in all of my NFL team grades. The Kansas City Chiefs are 15th in this AFC draft grades list, and I promise that I'm not biased when I say that their draft was just mediocre. To begin, the Chiefs are the only team that had 2 F-grade selections, and with only 7 across all teams, that's concerning. Kingsley Suamataia is a positional need at offensive tackle, but I really do not like him as a prospect, so this was bound to be an F. Same thing with Jaden Hicks, and his was extreme to the point where I had him as an undrafted talent. But yes, there was good as well, beginning with their trade to get Xavier Worthy, which makes so much sense. Hunter Norzad and Kamal Haddon are depth needs with great value as well, and these 2 grades are more because of the lack of positional need. I just don't like how they picked several badly graded players even if it was some of their positional needs. But with how inconsistent this draft was, I'm still stuck on giving them a C+, but nonetheless, that's what they get in their second to worst draft. Moving into the 14th spot in the AFC, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars. Last year, this team was 13th in conference and got a B-, and this year they take a decline with less picks. And that starts with Brian Thomas Jr., who was a good prospect to take here, but I'm not sure if this team needed him when they had larger needs. And then they take Mason Smith, who I'm not high on whatsoever. He was actually the 11th best defensive tackle on the board at that time. Following it with Jarrian Jones was good, but as you can see, these next 4 picks are not ones that I particularly enjoyed, especially Keelan Robinson. What was the point in taking him? He's, in my eyes, an undrafted talent, and you took him at a position that was not needed. I did like how they ended with Miles Cole, who in my eyes was one of the bigger steals of this draft. But that's not enough to justify not giving them a C+ grade. This leads them to the 3rd worst team in the AFC and the 6th worst team overall. The Miami Dolphins get us into the B level, but this team still had the 4th worst draft in their conference. I just don't think they made many good selections. As you can tell though, they made one spectacular one. Virginia wideout Malik Washington was an absolute steal and should compete with Berrios as that number 1 slot receiver. I did not enjoy them taking Taj Washington at 241 though, as you definitely did not need 2 slots in this class. But I'm more neutral on this draft class than anything. Chop Robinson off the edge was a good value pick, but the need isn't particularly there. Same with Mohamed Kamara, who was a huge steal at the time, being the 2nd best edge on the board, but he lines up as their 5th best edge rusher, and needing different positions makes this pick just neutral. And I've been iffy on them taking an offensive tackle in this draft, but even then, I don't think Patrick Paul was the best choice at this position. Jalen Wright brings it all together, as I already didn't like him much, but they went for another playmaker that just wasn't needed at all. Patrick McMorris wasn't great either, but it's not the most important thing to this B- draft class, which is the 25th best draft class in this 2024 draft. Another B- grade comes into play here, with the Indianapolis Colts being ranked 12th in the AFC. They made two very good selections with Laiatu Latu and AD Mitchell to start the draft. Two not huge needs, but great value picks. And even the next two selections of Matt Goncalves and Tanner Bortolini were solid, buffing up that offensive line depth like they needed to. But once they took Anthony Gold at 142, things started to go downhill as I gave that pick a C. They had bigger needs there, and after selecting Jalen Carleys at 151, they eventually filled that need by taking safety Jalen Simpson, who was also the third best safety on the board. Two more mediocre selections with undrafted talents Micah Abraham and Jonah Laulu closed out this class. I just thought that they totally failed to fix their secondary, which was, in my opinion, their number one task going into the class. So as a result, they get a B-, being the 12th best AFC team and the 24th best NFL team. In last year's draft, I had 3 A+ teams, and while I have none this year, the Cincinnati Bengals took a pretty solid tumble this year. Another pretty polarizing class in this conference, as this one just never had consistency at one point. The start of this class was actually pretty good though, with Amarius Mims, Chris Jenkins, and Jermaine Burton all being solid picks. I thought Jenkins was a phenomenal selection, as they need the defensive line depth. Then 2 straight C's derailed it a bit, with McKinley Jackson and Eric All being questionable value picks. Josh Newton was definitely a value pick despite the last 2, but Tanner McLachlan was super questionable. They did not need a second tight end, especially one that I think is an undrafted talent. The final 3 picks saw 3 different grade levels, and that wraps up this really awkward draft class. Nonetheless, they get a B grade. That is 11th in the AFC and 22nd in the NFL. Getting into the top 10 here, the worst draft from last year in the New York Jets made a significant improvement in 2024. This class had some questionable depth selections, but I do think altogether that this class was solid. I wasn't a big fan of the Olu Fashanu pick at first, but there is a lot of age at that tackle position for New York. Then they took Malachi Corley, which I understand if people like it, but I'm just not as high on him as your normal guy. And then back-to-back A- picks in Braylon Allen and Jordan Travis elevated this draft to a good grade. But then they questioned me with the Isaiah Davis pick. 1, I had him as an undrafted talent. 2, this is their second running back pick. And that means you're either dumping Isaiah Davis or Israel Abanikanda from last year. Quantez Stiggers and Jalen Key wrapped up this class. 2 interesting DB picks that aren't bad by any means. I just think New York overall had an intriguing draft. Given which positions New York prioritized and how they executed to get them in this draft, I think it was still solid. So as a result, this class gets a B grade, which is 10th in the AFC and 19th in the NFL. The Las Vegas Raiders had one of the most fun draft classes this year, and they actually end up 9th on this list. They immediately set the tone for this draft by taking Brock Bowers 13th overall. They didn't particularly need him position-wise, but he was the best prospect on the board at the time, and he opens up a lot of opportunities for this offense. Afterwards, they went with the first interior offensive lineman in Oregon center Jackson Powers Johnson. And they also took New Hampshire running back Dylan Laube, who wasn't my favorite pick, but his upside is undeniable. On top of that, they closed their draft strong with the last 4 picks, and Laube was actually the worst one of those 4 at a B+, but 2 picks derailed their chances at being in the A level. Beginning with Delmar Glaze, I won't doubt that they needed offensive tackle, but taking a 6th round talent in the 3rd round is not good. That's also the case for cornerback DeCamerion Richardson, who was picked 112th overall. He was 229th on my big board. But this draft was pretty strong overall. They rank 9th in the AFC for draft classes and 18th in the NFL. As we get into the back half of this list, we got to talk about the New England Patriots, who are 8th in the AFC. When you kick off your draft with an A+ pick in Drake May, you gotta follow it up better than this, but it still wasn't a bad class at all. I liked the Jalen Polk pick to surround May, but there were 4 better receivers at this point, and they also took an offensive tackle in Caden Wallace, but I think they reached a bit for him when they probably could have landed him later on. Then they also got Javon Baker, who I thought was a good receiver and pick, but nothing special, just like Polk. Then they had a couple questionable picks to me, with Layden Robinson being my 246th ranked prospect selected at 103. Cornerback Marcellus Dial was an undrafted talent to me, but then they capitalized with Jaheim Bell at the end. And they also took another quarterback in Tennessee's Joe Milton, which caught me off guard honestly, but it wasn't a bad pick at all. So all around, this was a pretty strong draft for New England. This draft class places 8th in the AFC and 16th in the NFL. This 7th ranked team could have had one of the best drafts in the entire league, but the Buffalo Bills' later round picks kind of ruined their chances at that. Keon Coleman was my 2nd best receiver on the board and went to a wide receiver needy team. Cole Bishop, Ray Davis, Cedric Van Pran, and Javon Solomon all filled in big needs for Buffalo and got A grades as a result. The only non-A grade in the first few picks was Buffalo taking Dwayne Carter at 95, but one of their picks sparked an F. This Washington linebacker that I'm not going to try to even pronounce was someone who I found is very overrated. They picked Solomon right after, but their final 3 picks just didn't meet the standards they set earlier. Tyler Grable was an undrafted talent to me, Travis Clayton is a bold pick, but I like the upside, and Hardy was on my board, but there were a lot of corners that I thought were better. But overall, Buffalo wasn't a bad draft at all, and the first half of that draft class is elite. They also get a B+ in this draft, which is the 7th best team in the AFC and the 12th best in the NFL. Alright, I had 11 A grades in this draft class, and 6 of them come from the AFC. Let's kick it off with the Cleveland Browns. I think that Cleveland could pass off as an A grade to some people, but their first 5 picks were either good or great. The first 2 weren't elite by any means, but Michael Hall Jr. and Zach Zinter filled up needs. And then we get to those A's you see. Thrash wasn't the best receiver available, but still a nice pick anyways. Nathaniel Watson and Miles Harden bring in good depth at positions that need it, and along with that, they have fantastic value in terms of how late they got picked. But Cincinnati's Jawan Briggs is a pick that I was and still am questioning. He goes into a crowded position that did not need another interior defensive lineman, and he was an undrafted talent to me. So he probably won't get a roster spot, but everyone else should with how good this draft class was. A- for this Cleveland team, which ranks 6th in the AFC and 11th in the NFL. Heading into the top 5, I have the Denver Broncos, who I thought killed this draft for the most part. They didn't have any awful picks by any means, which is a thing that we haven't seen yet on this list. And it began with taking their hopeful franchise quarterback in Bo Nix. And while I wasn't high on him, it's still a good pick for Denver. And Jonah Ellis is another guy I wasn't high on going in, but the positional need and with how many available players there were at that position makes it a good pick anyways. Then, 2 A+ selections came into town, the only team with multiple A+ picks. Trading up to get Troy Franklin was fantastic, with Bo Nix being the new signal caller in town. And cornerback Chris Abrams-Drain was the 2nd best prospect on the board when he got picked, and it goes to a team needing corner. Audric Estime was also a good pick for that value, as he complements Williams and McLaughlin pretty well. The final 2 picks in Devon Vele and Nick Gargiulo weren't great picks, but it closed out a very good draft overall. The Broncos get an A- draft class, which ranks 5th in the AFC and 10th in the NFL. Heading into the top 4, I have the biggest winner from last season's draft, and that is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Up until the first B pick that you see on this list, The Steelers had 11 straight A-grade selections dating back to last year. They had 7 last season and the 4 first ones that you see here. The first 4 were some great picks, including bolstering up the O-line with the first 2, both guys being at the top of the remaining prospects left. Then we go down to an A- with Roman Wilson, but right back to the A with Peyton Wilson. Some say Peyton is the steal of the draft, and while he was my second best linebacker on the board, it was still a phenomenal selection. But the next 3 selections didn't catch my eye as much, beginning with guard Mason McCormick. Yet another pick on the O-line, which I'm not opposed to, but I'm just not as high on McCormick as some people are. I also didn't see the importance of taking Logan Lee, plus he was a mid-6th round grade and he was the 9th best defensive tackle on the board. And then Ryan Watts just isn't a guy that I like at all. But despite these 3 picks, I still loved the selections of Fautanu, Frazier, and Peyton Wilson. As a result, the Steelers get an A grade. This is the 4th best in the AFC and the 8th best in the NFL. In the 3rd slot in the AFC, we have yet another AFC North team and the best AFC North team, that being the draft class of the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens just didn't have enough A grades to get them to the top, but they kicked off their draft with a phenomenal pick. Cornerback Nate Wiggins was my number 1 defender in this class, and to get him at 30 with that huge positional need at corner is ridiculous. Then they took Roger Rosengarten to be their new right tackle, and then they got after the A grades again with the selection of Adisa Isaac. 3 straight B grade selections came afterwards, starting with Tez Walker, who made my overrated prospects list. But he was also a projected 2nd round pick, and I think the 4th round pick is a good spot for him to land. TJ Tampa and Rasheen Ali were other B grades, as Tampa got a B+ since he wasn't the best corner on the board, and Ali got a B because of personal positional need. They returned to the A's by selecting backup quarterback Devin Leary, who at the time was the number 2 quarterback left on the board. And while they did end the draft with 2 C caliber players, I still think this class was strong enough to make the top 3 in the AFC. They get the A- just like the last 3 teams, and they have the 6th best draft class in the NFL. And the runner-up in the AFC is the Tennessee Titans, who have yet another very strong draft class, just like last year's. They knew what they needed, and that's what they executed in this draft. That began with the J.C. Latham selection at 7th overall, and I know a lot of people don't like the pick, but I really do. And while the pick of Tavondre Sweat got a B grade, it was a positional need, but we end up getting back to the A's anyways with Cedric Gray. He wasn't my favorite linebacker in this class, but I thought where he got picked was good for him. The same goes for Jarvis Brownlee Jr., and they especially needed a corner after losing a couple of them in the offseason. The only C grade here is Jaquan Jackson, as he was not my favorite wideout at that time. But closing out the draft with both safety James Williams and edge rusher Jalen Harrell helps them get guys who probably should have gone earlier anyways. These Titans are looking mighty to the draft, I can't lie. If they continue to bolster this offensive line, Will Levis is going to have a lot of help in hopes that he becomes the new franchise quarterback in Tennessee. They get an A- as well, but they get the best A- of the group. This is the 2nd best draft class in the AFC and the 5th best draft class in the whole league. And finally, regrettably as a Denver Broncos fan, the best 2024 NFL draft class in the AFC belongs to the Los Angeles Chargers. Yes, there is an F here, but look at the rest of these picks. The consistency was crazy good and near A+ caliber. They started the draft with 4 straight A's. Joe Alt kicked it off, and while I would have liked wideout Malik Neighbors here, Alt is still a good pick. Besides, they picked a wide receiver with Ladd McConkey in the 2nd round, which should give them a great option out of the slot. Junior Colson and Justin Eboigbe also got A's because of positional needs and the value with them, especially with Colson. Cornerback Cam Hart also got an A grade, and they actually got an A+ in Brendan Rice, another wide receiver that absolutely slipped too far. Even Kamani Vidal and Cornelius Johnson were solid picks. But yes, I'll address the F grade here. I like how they went for a cornerback, but I had an undrafted grade on Tarheeb still, so I just don't like getting that in the 5th round, especially the second pick of the 5th round. If they ended up picking a guy like Josh Newton or DJ James at this spot, I would have given this team an A+. And that is why the Los Angeles Chargers got the best grade in the AFC. Alongside that best AFC grade, they are the 3rd best draft class in the entire league. So yes, the top 2 teams are in the NFC. Stay tuned for that video coming out on Wednesday. Well, those are my 2024 NFL draft grades in the AFC. Do you agree with my grades? What would you change? Let me know in the comment section below. Wait, are you not subscribed yet? Well, do it now. I release content like this all the time and would really appreciate your support. I'm Chase Keller from Chase Keller Journalism, and I will see you all next time.